Another tie from my secret Santa. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. And as the cartoon indicated, yes, we're going to devote another show to the NFL tie. This is kind of a sequel to last week's show when I got kind of 2.5 divisions of the NFL. I didn't get to the Central Division, and I promised I would because it is kind of interesting because when we do the Coastal, that's what really gave me the inspiration to do the NFL tie. And as you recall, I said that even though it wasn't the record for most ties, 1967, it is the most in the NFL in the last 50 years. And even though they had 9 ties in the NFL in 1970, the leagues had already had merged. Actually, that year, 1967, the AFL had 3 ties, but of course, their records and their league were separate from the NFL. There were 9 ties in the NFL, and you're going to find out something very interesting and odd about the year of the tie over the last 50. And I really do believe that probably the NFL probably always thought about ending the tie and going to an overtime or a sudden death. But maybe 67, I don't have any verification on this, plus 1970, maybe they were the real catalysts towards going toward the overtime period. I really do believe that the NFL didn't want to exhaust the players or kill them. So you still have, technically, you can get a tie in today's game. Do I like the ties? Not when I'm playing. I definitely want a resolution. Whether I win or lose, I want to go off the field of battle. And believe me, I'm an old, raggedy weekend warrior, but I want to know the results. I want a resolution to the game. Now, as far as me watching the NFL, I think it's absolutely entertaining. And I love it because it causes so much chaos in a lot of ways. Because, at the end of the year with the NFL, you get, okay, playoff possibilities. This is what this team has to do. This is what this team has to do. This is what A has to do. A has to hope that B and C and D lose, or if D ties, then A can get in if C and E do something. So it's kind of crazy. And we're going to get into that. And really, I'm just going to segue to one thing, and then I'm going to come back in it. And that is another cartoon I have this week, and it is on the carousel of coaching changes that you are just unbelievably seeing right now in college football. And that is this. It's that time of year. And you see, of course, I did this maybe a week ago, so I still have, it is fall. I got the pumpkins all falling apart. And then I have a list of college coaches that have been released or fired. Now, I put released in quotation marks. All right, you have Dan Mullen, who was ousted right away at Florida. Justin Fuentes at Virginia Tech. Butch Davis, who's had some big-time spots with, I believe, North Carolina and Miami. He's out at FIU, Florida Institute. Tom Arth at Akron. Gary Patterson, who I always thought was a really, really, really good coach. After 20 years, he stepped down at TCU during the season and was replaced. And, of course, Ed Orgeron, who won a national title with Joe Burrow in 2019, he was ousted at LSU after going 6-6, including a last win against Texas A&M in his final game with the Bayou Bengals. And, of course, he has been replaced by none other than Brian Kelly, who stepped down at Notre Dame. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of Notre Dame and Brian Kelly. First of all, I don't know anything. So anything I would give you is just theory and probably my own gossip, created gossip. But I will tell you this. It's not unprecedented what Kelly did in the annals of Notre Dame history, because I did look and did some research on other coaches who left the Fighting Irish. However, this one, and I think this is why it resonates so much with college fans, it really is a strange bit of circumstances. You have a guy right now, and of course, I was just telling you about the NFL tiebreakers. Isn't that an interesting thing? They're getting rid of the ties, and our show is about ties in the NFL. And here, as I'm doing this, I am wondering what the possibilities of Notre Dame, which dropped in the coaches poll from 5 to 6 and were replaced in the 5th slot by Oklahoma State. And we'll get into that in a couple of seconds. But all the things that have to happen for Notre Dame maybe to get back into the college football. And I really believe this. I can probably state this because I have seen this, and it's got to be on the minds of the people who determine who go to the Final Four of college football. Notre Dame, without a coach, although they did name their defensive coach as their head coach, but nonetheless, first game will be his first as a head coach. And I am sure all of this is coming into play with the people who set up the College Football Bowl series. Now, why do I say that? Well, technically, I would say right now you have Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, and Cincinnati and Oklahoma State all ahead of Notre Dame. Georgia, for Notre Dame, I believe to get in, Georgia has to beat Alabama. If Alabama wins, they're done. I really mean that. Now, they also need Michigan to lose. They need a trifecta here. They need Michigan to lose to Iowa. And potentially, they might need Cincinnati to lose. And I'll come back to that while I'm just saying might. And they definitely need those two to lose. And they need Oklahoma State to lose today to Baylor. Okay? Now, why do I set all this up? If those three teams lose, they'll all have 2 losses. Notre Dame with only 1. And they'll have to be put into a spot because I can't see them supersede. Although I was seeing some other polls, and guess what? Ohio State is actually ahead of Notre Dame in a couple of interesting polls with the metrics and all the rest of it. And the only reason I wouldn't put Ohio State in there is that they were beaten by Oregon and Michigan. They were beaten by Oregon in Columbus. And Oregon didn't have all their players. And Oregon has lost not once, not twice, but 3 times this year. They lost to Stanford, which lost to Notre Dame. And they lost not once, but twice in back-to-back games to Utah, which has 3 losses. So it would be very difficult, I think, to kind of give a rational statement as to why Ohio State could jump Notre Dame. Okay, that being said, here's why I think Cincinnati has to win for Notre Dame. If they win, they beat Notre Dame in South Bend. They would be the only undefeated team along with Georgia. And Notre Dame's only loss would be to only one of 2 unbeaten teams. So you could see Notre Dame maybe getting in that way. Now, why does the Brian Kelly? Because as I stated, the kind of chaotic way that this all transpired this week, I mean, it was biblical in terms of a college coach. And he didn't appear he was fired. He never offered that his contract was not being extended. And I don't want to get into the locker room. I have no insight into what goes on behind closed doors between the administration, the athletics, and the coach. But he leaves. And they were still in a good position. And this is why it's so bizarre. And this is what made me do the study of Notre Dame football coaches. Up until the time of, I do believe, Jerry Faust, no Notre Dame coach was ever technically fired. Their contract may not have been renegotiated or extended or even offered. But here's the deal. Most of the Notre Dame coaches who left, many of them didn't coach again. And here's the other thing. Here's why else this is kind of bizarre, is that Notre Dame, and I don't think there's really an argument here. When you think of college football, as most fans do, Notre Dame has got to be one of the first things you think about. And why I think, I'm not saying it's a step down, but let's just say it's an interesting step for him to leave a program to go to a school that has a TV contract as a member of a conference, leaving a school that has its own contract, that has all its games on TV. And that, in that respect, it just baffles my mind. And why I'm going to say that again, because no Notre Dame coach has left specifically to go to another school of quote unquote, maybe a little bit lesser. And what I mean by that is this. I went all the way back to the beginnings of Notre Dame, and I found that really only one guy who was there for 3 years, a fellow by the name of Hunk Anderson. He replaced Knute Rockne, and of course, Knute Rockne was the coach who made Notre Dame who they are. I mean, let's be honest. Rockne, for all now, this was before the AP and all the rest of it, but Rockne did win some mythical titles, but he knew how to market the name Notre Dame. He took it from a small Catholic school in the middle of nowhere, South Bend, still an hour and a half away from Chicago. And he made it into not just a local, not just a region, state, not just a regional, not just a national brand. He's gone and he actually helped make it into an international brand, because Notre Dame does play outside the country. I think they're returning to Ireland at least for the second or third time. Next year, they're going to be playing Navy again for, I believe, the second time. They also played once else outside in Europe. I can't recall, so I'm pretty sure. But anyway, he made them into a national thing. He knew how to market the team. That's why USC and Notre Dame play every year, because he loved to go out and basically treat his players to a vacation at Thanksgiving time in the warm Southern California sun, fun in the sun type of thing. Rockne is unfortunately killed in a plane crash. He's replaced by Hunk Anderson. Anderson lasts only 3 years, and maybe I'm thinking this. He might have left Notre Dame, and I'm doing some study on it. I'm sure somebody else knows off the tip of their fingers. And he goes to NC State, but he never wins at NC State. In fact, he loses 17 of 28 decisions with one tie. At Notre Dame, he was 16-9-2. He's replaced by Elmer Layden, who goes 47-13. Layden never coaches again after he leaves. He's replaced by Frank Leahy, and Leahy, of course, is the guy who really further embedded Notre Dame into the minds, hearts, and souls of every American, as he wins 1, 2, 3. He won 4 national titles, and finished second twice more. He's replaced by Terry Brennan. Started out well, won his first 17 of 20. Then actually, he's okay. Goes 2-8, 7-3, 6-4. Never wins a national title, but he never coaches again. Joe Kuharchik never coaches in the college ranks again. Kind of was okay. He's replaced for 1 year by Hugh DeVore, 1963, who never coaches again. Ara comes in, wins 2 national titles. I can tell you a little bit about Ara because this is the time where I became a Notre Dame fan, following the game religiously with my father and my brothers. Pacing. Actually, the one game I really particularly remember, I think it was I'm going to say it's 1971. They played LSU in a game in November. I can't remember if it was at LSU or at Notre Dame. I want to say it's at Notre Dame. Notre Dame won the game 3-0. Let me just see if I can find that game. Notre Dame won the game 3-0. And I remember it was not on. Yeah, it was actually November 21st, 1970 at South Bend. And they beat the number 7 team in the country, LSU, 3-0. And I think they had to lead that entire game. It wasn't like it was nothing, and then it was a late second field goal. I just remember pacing my living room and TV floor, listening to the game on the radio. And, of course, Notre Dame was broadcast every week on national radio. So before national TV and the Peacock, they were on national radio. And just remember walking back and forth, probably saying the rosary so that Notre Dame would win the game. And I just remember it was almost like my father and I wore a hole in the carpet listening to that game, a Saturday afternoon, late November. It's a great memory, and I still have it. Anyway, Ara does win not 1 but 2 national titles. His final game, he beats Alabama again, back-to-back bowls. He beat him in the Sugar, in probably one of the greatest bowl games that's never talked about. And reasons being, played in a steady drizzle, There were a lot of fumbles or turnovers in that game, and it was played on New Year's Eve instead of New Year's Day. And it was Notre Dame wins that game with that big heave on 3rd and long to Robin Weber, who catches the ball at the 50, and basically Notre Dame sits on. Actually, they didn't sit on the ball. They actually ran 2 plays to run out the clock. Kind of weird how things have changed. But he wins the national title that year, and he wins it in 1966. And of course, that was the year that everyone is tainting it because he ties Michigan State, and I promise I will do something on that. But Ara retires from the game as well, never coaches again. He's replaced by Devine, who had coached at Arizona State and Missouri, then goes to the pros. And I got to remember, and here's the thing with Devine. Devine is actually, ready for this, 53-16 at Notre Dame, including a national title. And he nearly won a second one. But, of course, he literally runs into the one-man buzzsaw, Herschel Walker, in the Sugar Bowl of 1981 for the 1980 season. Walker runs for 150 yards. The Bulldogs beat them 17-10. Here's what people don't know. Herschel Walker was beaten up in that game, literally and figuratively, by the Irish, and he still was able to run for 150 yards. He had separated his shoulder on one of the early plays in the first quarter, and Notre Dame knew it. And he never got help from his quarterback, Buck Ballou, until late in the game when Ballou finally completed a pass. So it was really Herschel against the Irish defense. Notre Dame was also stymied on a 4th and 1. The Bulldog defense held. Notre Dame probably could have gone in for maybe a tying touchdown. I'm not saying it would have won the game, but I just remember that standing out, and the Bulldogs won the national title. Devine leaves after that game, never coaches again. The only thing I do remember with Green Bay, he does go to Green Bay in between stints of Arizona State, Missouri, and then Notre Dame. And I remember him breaking his leg in a game at Green Bay. A guy ran right into him, and I think he had a compound fracture of the leg. I'm not laughing, but it was just amazing. He was just standing on the sidelines. It's dangerous over there sometimes. And I remember him coming back, I think, the following week on crutches to lead the Packers. Now, he didn't have the success in the pros that he did in the college. But again, after Devine leaves Notre Dame, and he does win the national title in 77, by the way. He won it with Montana, the green jerseys, brings that back in the 77 season. And then in the Cotton Bowl, they just demoralize Texas 38-10. He never coaches again. Jerry Faust comes in and takes over where Devine left. Doesn't really fare well. He does come from the power Moeller High School that had been number 1 a number of times in the mythical high school national championships. He does go on, but he doesn't coach. He does coach 1987. He's kind of like the first guy. There's people who think he was fired, but he really stepped down. I think he does step down. He wasn't technically offered a contract, and that's what usually happened with the Notre Dame coaches. They weren't really offered a contract or tendered a contract, but he takes over Akron. He's like the first guy who does it, and he goes 36-49 since Hunk Anderson. But another thing is following. He's not that successful. He does have a winning record technically at Notre Dame, 30-26, but he doesn't win a national championship. And he's 13 games under 500 Akron. He is replaced by Holtz, who had a stipulation in his Minnesota contract that he could take over at Notre Dame if the position ever opened up. And, of course, we know Holtz leads them to a national title. I always like to credit Holtz for winning another title for Notre Dame, and that was in 1977 when his Arkansas Razorbacks destroyed Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl, 31-6. And they were really the only thing in the path of Notre Dame winning that title with Dan Devine, because Notre Dame had been 5th, Texas won, and Oklahoma State, I think, was 3rd or 2nd in the nation. They got trumped, destroyed. Holtz does go to South Carolina, and he goes in 1999. I think he waited a couple of years. But here's the thing, I got to look this up. His first year with South Carolina, he's 0-11, which leads to him being 33-37 over his career with the Gamecocks. Again, leave Notre Dame and you're under 500. However, if you take that 11-loss season out, he's actually 33-26. Okay, so he probably cleaned house, changed things around, philosophy and all the rest of it. Holtz, of course, was replaced by Bob Davie, and he goes to New Mexico. Davie's 10 games over at 500 with Notre Dame. But he leaves, well, he's let go, and he's replaced by Ty Winningham. He actually went to New Mexico. I couldn't believe how many years he coached there, and he is 35-64. Tyrone Winningham, I do believe he is fired. And while he was at Notre Dame, he was 21-15. But he goes to Washington, and he's 11-37. Again, losing. Charlie Weiss is fired. Wasn't really too successful at Notre Dame, 41-49. He goes to Kansas, and he's 6-22. And then, of course, Brian Kelly. So it will remain to be seen what Kelly can do with LSU. I have my theories. I'm not going to share them with you because they're just theories, and I don't know what I'm talking about because, as I said, I'm not privy to any of the politics or any of the behind the scenes. But I will tell you this. You think Notre Dame's not a national team and LSU is more of a regional team? I did stats just of the rosters of both teams this year. Notre Dame, okay, has 14 players from California, 11 from Georgia, 7 from Jersey, 7 from Maryland, 10 from Indiana, their home state, 9 from Ohio, 8 from Illinois, 6 each from Pennsylvania and Florida. Basically, they are represented, their roster is represented by 31 of the 50 states in the United States. No one from D.C. And also Germany. They got a player from Germany. 62% of the United States have a representative on the Notre Dame roster. Conversely, LSU has 57, and I counted in, I'm probably off by a couple here. 57 of 109 on their roster is from LSU. Now, I'm just doing the roster from ESPN. Maybe there's a couple here and there for both squads, but I think you get the gist. Or 52% come from the Bayou State. Of the remaining guys, 37 are from the South, Deep South. And I'm talking Deep South, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Alabama, and Tennessee. Well, I'll say 35 because I don't really consider Virginia Deep South. They become more like Middle Atlantic. They have 6 people from the Midwest. They have 4 from what I would consider the Pac-12 or the Rocky Mountains. And they have 5 from the Mid-Atlantic states of Massachusetts, well, from the Northeast, Massachusetts, Maryland, and PA. That is what I'm saying about Notre Dame. And that is why this has been so fascinating. Why does Kelly leave a team with its own TV contract? Yes, it is a team that if they don't make the college football, you're going to have to say they have to go 12-0 or unbeaten during the regular season to make the college football. Because it looks like, Oklahoma State passed Notre Dame, as I stated, because they're playing and they might make the Final Four, even with Cincinnati winning, because they would have beaten 2 teams back-to-back who were ranked. That's why Notre Dame really needs a lot of help. They need Oklahoma State to lose, even though they're not in the Final Four right now. They definitely need Michigan to lose, and they really need Alabama to lose. I say Cincinnati doesn't have to lose. I think if those 3 teams, Cincinnati winning would just improve the resume of Notre Dame because they were the only team that defeated Notre Dame in South Bend, and they outplayed the Irish that day. Ritter, their quarterback, who should be, I got to be honest, there should be serious consideration for him for the Heisman in only this respect. He's brought them to 2. They've lost 1 game in the last 2 years. It's unprecedented that Cincinnati will be playing on New Year's Day 2 years in a row. They'll probably never do that again or for a while. And they've come out of nowhere to do this. Yes, they were 12-0 under Kelly when he was there. And interestingly enough, Kelly left to take the Notre Dame. But that's a little bit different because you're technically going a step up. Now, I'm not saying LSU is a step down, but here's the deal. LSU doesn't have their own contract. LSU recruits from basically one region. Yeah, they'll get a scatter from here and there. Notre Dame is nationwide, actually international with the German recruit from Germany. So will be interesting. And that's why I think this has been such a controversial and really an interesting story, not just for Notre Dame fans, but college football fans. Why does Kelly leave to go to, now, ton of money. Could it also be this? And I'll just leave this because I brought this up as a theory already, and it has nothing to do with Notre Dame or any involvement with that. But could Kelly and LSU know something like I've been proposing, that eventually you'll see something like the Southeast Conference say, you know what, if these kids can get sponsors, we're just going to make this professional or as close to professional, and we'll just grow this conference. Because really, when you think about why did Oklahoma and Texas both leave? Being Oklahoma, they had a chance to potentially get into the 4, and they have been there. Now they're coming into the Southeast Conference. They may struggle to get there. And Texas had an under 500 season this year. They may struggle to get there. So it's going to be interesting. All right. So all things, I just figured I would put the college football in there and it had to miss. Now, for the last 15 minutes, I would like to talk about the NFL. And it is the tie, the season of the tie. I was looking, and here's the thing. I will go over some of the guys who I probably ignored last week. I was brought up about Jack Whitaker, talking about he did this whole thing. You can catch it on YouTube. He does a review of the NFL 1967. As I said to you, it was broken into the four C's: Capital, Century, Central, Coastal. Central is the only one that still exists, and all 4 teams that were put in the Central still are in there today: Minnesota, Green Bay, Detroit, and Chicago. And I just remember that basically he accentuated the defenses in the NFL Central. And really, Dick Butkus, the quintessential Bear, Dick Butkus. That, of course, I didn't get the regular tops. I wanted to get the Kellogg's ones. I don't know what it is. If you were a collector of baseball cards in the 70s, I know that today you have the Fleer and the Donruss and stuff, but there was something about collecting these 3D cards. They gave a lot of information on the back, the stats, and all the rest of it. So he was there along with, I wanted to bring up 2 other guys, the Chicago Bears, and of course, Gale Sayers. I know he's not a defensive player, but he is a running back extraordinaire. And this guy, Dave Osborne, who Whitaker had said was a young and upcoming player on the vastly improved Minnesota Vikings. And he was actually right, because 2 years later, they would be playing in the Super Bowl, and Osborne would be a key component of that team. What I liked about Osborne, he was from North Dakota, so he was kind of a local boy making good with the Minnesota Vikings. I have this card. I did show a card last week of him, but this was a card game they used to play. I don't know whether Topps put it out or it was something separate, but I guess you pulled it. And Osborne, here's the other thing. Osborne didn't spell his name with an E. How great is that? Okay? He didn't spell his name with an E. He left it off. And Osborne, good player, number 41. If I find his card as I reminisce here, I will. I wanted to also tell you about Mel Farr, who had been a very good rookie that year, gained a number of yards for the Lions, who would go to the playoffs in 1970, of course. Mel Farr on that team, I think he gained 800 yards. And, of course, his career was limited. I think he gets hurt. I'm pretty sure he is hurt. But he was a guy from UCLA. I always remember him. He was a rookie that year and does make the All-Star team. He ran for 860 yards, and he had receiving yards of 317, and then he produced over 1,000 yards. And of course, yes, he got hurt the next 2 years. He was hurt in 71. He never played another full season. Actually, he played 13 games in 67. Actually ran for 4.2 yards a carry. His high was 4.7 in the following year, but he only played 9 games. And actually, it's interesting, had they been able probably to keep him healthy, you never know what would have happened to the Lions. They might have really been battling the Minnesota Vikings. And of course, here's the interesting thing, and I got to look this up. Mel Farr was the rookie that year, as well as Lem Barney. And we talked about Lem Barney 2 weeks ago. We were talking about Thanksgiving. I don't know. I have to look that up. I would be curious to see if there's any team that had the rookie defensive player and the rookie offensive player in the same year on the same team. That would be interesting. And that, the interesting thing again, the Lions were 5-7-2 that year. Ready for this? And this is what really perked me up about doing a show like this. Every team in the Central Division that year had a tie. Green Bay was 9-4-1. Chicago 7-6-1. Detroit 5-7-2. And the Vikings, ready for this, they had the best of anybody else. They were 3-8-3. And that is the segue I'm going to use because, ready for this, we get to the Coastal Division. And let's talk a little bit about the Coastal Division. For those who aren't aware, they put the Atlanta Falcons, basically an expansion team from 66, and the Baltimore Colts, who came from the AAFC and were a very competitive team. Obviously, they win the Super Bowl, get to the Super Bowl in the 70s, and win it, beating the Cowboys, and, of course, lost to the Jets. And probably one of the more famous Super Bowls, Super Bowl III. And the Colts, Rams, Niners, and Falcons. Ready for this? The Falcons were 1-12-1. Their tie, be patient with me here, their tie came against the Washington Redskins. This just adds. They tied the Redskins on the 15th of October. All right? The Redskins, they tied them. They were 5-6-3. Here's the deal with the Redskins. The Redskins lost their opening game, then won 2, then lost. So they're 2-2-0. Then they tied back to back. They tied the Falcons and they tied the Rams. This wasn't the first occurrence that had happened in the NFL that year. Actually, this happened 3 times, and I'm glad I opened up the Washington Redskins. They tied the Falcons 20-20, and then the following week, they tie the Rams 28-28. Now segue to this. The Rams, they tie the Redskins, all right, on Sunday, October 15th. They tie the Reds, Sunday, October 22nd, they tie the Redskins 28-28. A week after, they tied the Baltimore Colts 24-24. And the Colts would follow up the tie with the LA Rams and tie the Minnesota Vikings 2020 on October the 22nd. Minnesota, interestingly enough, would lose their first 4, and I think this is why Whitaker was going crazy about them. They lost their first 4, so they're 1-4. They win their first game by beating the Packers, who would win the division, and they beat them 10-7, hard-fought defensive struggle. Then they tie the Colts 20-20. They lose by a point to the Falcons, their only win of the year to the Falcons, by the Falcons. So they're 1-5-1. After that, ready for this, they go 3-3-2 the rest of the year, okay? They go and they play the Giants and beat the Giants. They tie the Lions. So they are right now 2-5-2 on Sunday, November 12th, 1967. They lose to the Browns 14-10. So you can see the development of this team when you really think about it. They throttle the Steelers, who are not good that year. Remember, they won 4 games, being led by Kent Nix. They win 41-27. They do lose to the Green Bay Packers, who they lost to previously. They lost to them, though, 30-27. They lose to the Packers by a total of 6 points. And then they tie the Chicago Bears 10-10, who were 7-6-1 that year. And then, of course, they they lose to the Detroit Lions 14-3. So Whitaker was very prescient saying that, because really after the first 4 losses, they go 3-4-3 the rest of the way. And of their losses, they lose by 11, They lose by 3, so that's 14. They lose by 4 to the Cleveland Browns, who also made the playoffs that year. So that's 18, or that's 4, 7, 11, 18 points. And then they lose to the Falcons by 1, probably the only mistake they made along the way. So 19 points separate their 4 losses. Interestingly enough, maybe had they had maybe 7 points, now you're talking about a 5, 6, and 3 team, the same as the Redskins. And of course, the Redskins would eventually get Lombardi in 69. And this would be the last year. By the way, Green Bay, they lose to twice by 6 points. Green Bay would win their second Super Bowl. I forgot to mention that as well. Now we get 2. So it was kind of interesting for the Vikings. So they tied 3 times. It's just amazing. They tied 3 times, and they would be in the Super Bowl in 69. Now, the Coastal Division. Here's the deal with the Coastal Division. The Rams start out the season, and they're doing very well. They won their first 3. Then they lose. They're 3-1. Then they have the back-to-back ties. So going into the last weekend of October, Halloween weekend, or the week of Halloween, they are actually 3-1-2. Now, let me put up some people. By the way, here's Ray Nitschke. Remember I was showing you this last week, the back of the cards and how great they were as well. Let me just say this. Here's what they say about Ray Nitschke. Ray Nitschke, let me just see if I can see it. No, I can't. Ray Nitschke, a fullback at Illinois, carrying 79 times for a 6.5-yard average. Nitschke was a Packers third-round draft pick in 1957. After missing several games in 61 due to military service, he was voted the MVP of the 62 National Championship game against the Giants. Ray was voted the most outstanding linebacker for 1967 by the NFL players and was credited with 9 tackles against Oakland in the 68 Super Bowl. So this is card number 133 from NFL 1969. All right. And then the other guy, I did read about Charlie Taylor last week, Bob Hayes, who was at one time the fastest human being in the United States, or in the world, actually. Catching touchdown bombs is Bob's business. There's great alliteration, and the threat almost as valuable as the 6 points. If he never catches a pass, he's worth a couple of touchdowns a game, said teammate Dan Reeves. Bob seems to do something different and outstanding in every game. In 1970, so this is a 71 card. That's interesting. It looks just like the back of all the others. In 70, he combined with Craig Morton. Actually, these are all 1970 cards. Pardon me. With Craig Morton, the tie for the NFL's longest pass completion of the year when he caught an 89-yard touchdown pass against the Chiefs on October 25th. I actually saw that game. It was played in the mud. I don't remember the touchdown pass, though. Last year, Bob passed Frank Clark's 281 receptions to become the Cowboys' leading receiver all time. His best game occurred 11-13-66 when he gained 246 yards on pass receptions against the Redskins and caught 3 touchdown passes in a game against the Giants on 10-9-66. So he had some skill, he had some talent, and boy, did he have some speed. I just remember that he was he was noted as the fastest human in the world at one time. All right, again, segueing. Last conference. So you have the LA Rams, who would win the conference, the Coastal Division, with a record of 11-1-2, if I do remember correctly. It's interesting that the NFL actually has the NFL standings this way. It goes Capital, Century, Coastal, Central. You would think that the Central would come before the Coastal in terms of alphabetical order, but they didn't. Anyway, LA finished with a record of 11-1-2. Baltimore, the Colts, finished with a record of 11-1-2. San Francisco was 7-7, and of course the Falcons really pulled up the rear, 1-12-1, with their one win, of course, being against the Vikings, and their one tie. Let me just see. I think I mentioned it already, but I'll say it again, because I just forgot. Their one tie was, of course, with the Redskins, and their one win with the Minnesota Vikings. So I did mention it. Put it this way. After that one win, that made them, they were at that point 4-5. They were 1-5-1. They lost the rest of their games. All right. Now, LA, and what happened was this, and I'll always remember a buddy of mine, Benny, talking about this year in particular, and I guess maybe that was in the back of my mind. LA and Baltimore had met early in the year, and that was the tie game. They met on Sunday, October 15th. They tie. The Baltimore Colts tie the LA Rams. And in that game, now I don't know whether I'm going to assume Unitas played the entire game. Unitas was 21. I'm going to get a picture of Unitas. It's one of my favorite pictures all time. And Willie Richardson was one of his favorite receivers that year. But Johnny Unitas was 21-34 with 2 touchdowns and an interception. And his rival was Roman Gabriel, 19 for 31, 297, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. The game was 10-7 at halftime. It was 17-14 in favor of the Colts at the end of the third quarter. But ready for this? This is just incredible. And tell me this. All right. First catch, 53-yard bomb from Roman Gabriel to Jack Snow. Lou Michaels hits a field goal, make it 7-3. Lenny Moore of the Colts has a 3-yard run. Lou Michaels the kick, makes it 10-7 Baltimore. Then Jack Snow catches an 80-yard bomb from Gabriel, make it 14-10. Never knew this. Bruce Gossett, who played for the 49ers later on, was the field goal and extra point kicker for the LA Rams. Kind of interesting. It just goes to show you that many times field goal kickers, like relief pitchers, man, they're a vagabond, nomadic type of career. They bounce all over. Very rarely does a relief pitcher like a Mariano remain with one team his entire career. All right, so now it's 14-10. Then the Colts take the lead on a 14-yard pass from Johnny U to make it 17-14. This is where I wanted to bring in Willie Richardson. Willie Richardson gives them a 10-point lead on a 31-yard pass from Unitas. Lou Michaels kick makes it 24-14. Gossett kicks a field goal to make it 24-17. And then Gabriel hits Bernie Casey with a 16-yard pass to tie the game. Now, reason I bring up Bernie Casey, he becomes an actor. I guess being in LA, kind of like Roman Gabriel became an actor. And let's see, I'm just trying to think. Jimmy Brown becomes an actor, but just amazing that Bernie Casey was a pretty good football player and had a big catch. Knots the game. Now, why is that so important? It's so important because the later game, and maybe I'll pick this up next week, LA comes back and beats the Colts and wins and earns the Coastal Division Championship. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History. Thank you again for allowing me to come into your homes.